It's good to see everyone. Happy that you joined me on this rainy Friday morning. But we'll make it as sunny in here as we can. We'll spend some time together, read a good book, and it'll be a sunny day on the inside. Well, we're finished with our first week back after spring break. That went by like a snap. That was really quick. I can't believe it. Every day seems to go by so quickly, which I think is kind of unusual. I would think that maybe it would go by a little bit more slowly since really just in the house the whole time. But it does go by pretty fast. I chose a book today called Enemy Pie. And it's about a little boy who has an enemy. New kid has moved to the neighborhood and he doesn't like him. And it's about how he works through that particular problem and how he deals with his new enemy. I've been wanting to read this book, but it's a little bit long. You know, when I do the videos, I don't want to eliminate a book because it has a lot of dialogue in it. But there are some challenges to making a video when there's quite a bit of dialogue. I don't like to make any mistakes when I read this way. I don't like to make mistakes when I read anytime, but sometimes I do. And if it's live in a situation where you're all sitting in front of me, oh well, sometimes you make a mistake and you move on. But when you record it, and then I go back and I listen to it, and I make a mistake, or as I'm reading and I realize I make a mistake, I have to get rid of it and go back and do it again. And sometimes it gets a little bit frustrating. And when I see a lot of dialogue on a page, I get a little bit worried about that it's going to take a really long time. Sometimes I have to stop and take a break. I get frustrated on a particular page and I keep making the same mistake and it's kind of like stuck in my head and I can't get over it. And I keep making the same mistake over and over, so I'll take a little break. But that's what I was a little bit worried about Enemy Pie. And I know I'm going to make myself make mistakes now because I'm so worried about it. But it's a story I really wanted to read, and I think that you'll really enjoy it, as I do all of my books. And I'm going to get started to make sure I can get this posted as early as possible for everybody to enjoy on Friday. So sit back and relax. Come have a slice of Enemy Pie with me. Enemy Pie by Derek Munson, illustrated by Tara Calahan King. It should have been a perfect summer. My dad helped me build a treehouse in our backyard. My sister was at camp for 3 whole weeks, and I was on the best baseball team in town. It should have been a perfect summer, but it wasn't. It was all good until Jeremy Ross moved into the neighborhood right next door to my best friend Stanley. I did not like Jeremy Ross. He laughed at me when he struck me out in a baseball game. He had a party on his trampoline, and I wasn't even invited. But my best friend Stanley was. Jeremy Ross was the one and only person on my enemy list. I never even had an enemy list until he moved into the neighborhood. But as soon as he came along, I needed one. I hung it up in my treehouse where Jeremy Ross was not allowed to go. Dad understood stuff like enemies. He told me that when he was my age, he had enemies too, but he knew of a way to get rid of them. I asked him to tell me how. Tell you how? I'll show you how, he said. He pulled a really old recipe book off the kitchen shelf. Inside, there was a worn-out scrap of paper with faded writing. Dad held it up and squinted at it. Enemy Pie, he said, satisfied. You may be wondering what exactly is an enemy pie. I was wondering too. But Dad said the recipe was so secret he couldn't even tell me. I decided it must be magic. I begged him to tell me something, anything. I will tell you this, he said. Enemy pie is the fastest known way to get rid of enemies. Now, of course, this got my mind working. What kinds of things, disgusting things, would I put into a pie for an enemy? I brought Dad some weeds from the garden, but he just shook his head. I brought him earthworms and rocks, but he didn't think he'd need those. I gave him the gum I'd been chewing on all morning. He gave it right back to me. I went out to play, alone. I shot baskets until the ball got stuck on the roof. I threw a boomerang that never came back to me, and all the while I listened to the sounds of my dad chopping and stirring and blending the ingredients of enemy pie. This could be a great summer after all. Enemy pie was going to be awful. I tried to imagine how horrible it must smell, or worse yet, what it would look like. But when I was in the backyard looking for ladybugs, I smelled something really, really, really good. And as far as I could tell, it was coming from our kitchen. I was a bit confused. I went in to ask Dad what was wrong. Enemy pie shouldn't smell this good. But Dad was smart. If enemy pie smelled bad, your enemy would never eat it, he said. I could tell he'd made enemy pie before. The buzzer rang, and Dad put on the oven mitts and pulled the pie out of the oven. It looked like plain old pie. It looked good enough to eat. I was catching on. But still, I wasn't really sure how this enemy pie worked. What exactly did it do to enemies? Maybe it made their hair fall out, or their breath stinky. Maybe it made bullies cry. I asked Dad, but he was no help. He wouldn't tell me a thing. But while the pie cooled, he filled me in on my job. He talked quietly. There is one part of enemy pie that I can't do. In order for it to work, you need to spend a day with your enemy. Even worse, you have to be nice to him. It's not easy, but that's the only way that enemy pie can work. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Of course I was. It sounded horrible. It was scary, but it was worth a try. All I had to do was spend one day with Jeremy Ross. Then he'd be out of my hair for the rest of my life. I rode my bike to his house and knocked on the door. When Jeremy opened the door, he seemed surprised. He stood on the other side of the screen door and looked at me, waiting for me to say something. I was nervous. "Can you play?" I asked. He looked confused. "I'll go ask my mom," he said. He came back with his shoes in his hand. His mom walked around the corner to say hello. "You boys stay out of trouble," she said, smiling. We rode bikes for a while and played on the trampoline. Then we made some water balloons and threw them at the neighborhood girls. But we missed. Jeremy's mom made us lunch. After lunch, we went over to my house. It was strange, but I was kind of having fun with my enemy. He almost seemed nice. But of course, I couldn't tell Dad that, since he had worked so hard to make this enemy pie. Jeremy Ross liked my basketball hoop. He said he wished he had a basketball hoop, but they didn't have room for one. I let him win a game, just to be nice. Jeremy Ross knew how to throw a boomerang. He threw it and it came right back to him. I threw it and it went over my house and into the backyard. When we climbed over the fence to find it, the first thing Jeremy noticed was my treehouse. My treehouse was my treehouse. I was the boss. If my sister wanted in, I didn't have to let her. If my dad wanted in, I didn't have to let him. And if Jeremy wanted in... "Can we go in it?" he asked. I knew he was going to ask me that. But he was the top person, the only person on my enemy list. And enemies aren't allowed in my treehouse. But he did teach me to throw a boomerang. And he did have me over for lunch. And he did let me play on his trampoline. He wasn't being a very good enemy. "Okay," I said, "but hold on." I climbed up ahead of him and tore the enemy list off the wall. I had a checkerboard and some cards in the treehouse, and we played games until my dad called us down for dinner. We pretended we didn't hear him, and when he came out to get us, we tried to hide from him, but somehow he found us. Dad made us macaroni and cheese for dinner, my favorite. It was Jeremy's favorite too. Maybe Jeremy Ross wasn't so bad after all. I was beginning to think that maybe we should just forget about enemy pie. But sure enough, after dinner, Dad brought out the pie. I watched as he cut the pie into 8 thick slices. "Dad," I said, "it sure is nice having a new friend in the neighborhood." I was trying to get his attention and trying to tell him that Jeremy Ross was no longer my enemy. But Dad only smiled and nodded. I think he thought I was just pretending. Dad dished up 3 plates side by side with big pieces of pie and giant scoops of ice cream. He passed one to me and one to Jeremy. "Wow," Jeremy said, looking at the pie. "My dad never makes pies like this." It was at this point that I panicked. I didn't want Jeremy to eat enemy pie. He was my friend. I couldn't let him eat it. "Jeremy, don't eat it. It's a bad pie. I think it's poisonous or something." Jeremy's fork stopped before reaching his mouth. He crumpled his eyebrows and looked at me funny. I felt relieved. I had saved his life. I was a hero. "If it's so bad," Jeremy asked, "then why has your dad already eaten half of it?" I turned to look at my dad. Sure enough, he was eating enemy pie. "Good stuff," he mumbled through a mouthful. And that was all he said. I sat there watching them eat enemy pie for a few seconds. Dad was laughing. Jeremy was happily eating, and neither of them was losing any hair. It seemed safe enough, so I took a tiny taste. Enemy pie was delicious. After dessert, Jeremy rode his bike home, but not before inviting me over to play on his trampoline in the morning. He said he'd teach me how to flip. As for enemy pie, I still don't know how to make it. I still wonder if enemies really do hate it, or if their hair falls out, or their breath turns bad. But I don't know if I'll ever get an answer because I just lost my best enemy. And we're back. I was right. I made lots of mistakes while I was recording enemy pie, and it took me quite a bit of time. Oh, one of the pages I did 9 different times. 9 times. I kept making mistakes, and I didn't like how it sounded, and I had to go back. Oh, I'm exhausted. I need a nap before my staff meeting this afternoon. But it is a really great story about, how his dad makes this pie. and it's going to take care of his enemies. And the little boy, of course, thinks, oh great, something terrible will happen to my enemy, and then I won't have to deal with them anymore. But by the end of the story, we find out that that just isn't true. That Dad had a plan all along to get these two boys together and let them have a nice day. And by the end of the day, he was hoping, and he was correct, that they would be friends and no longer enemies. You know, this is not an unusual situation. I'm sure if you sit there and think for a moment that there is probably somebody in your life, or that you met before at school, or maybe on a baseball team, or at soccer, someone you didn't like when you first met them. You had a preconceived notion. You thought something about them. But then as time went on, you discovered that you did like them, and you became friends. I bet you if you think about it, you can think about an instance where that happened to you. Well, I hope you had a great week back. I hope you have a fantastic weekend, and we'll be back at it on Monday. Make sure you get outside. Hopefully the rain will let up and we'll have some good weather this weekend. I think one of the days it's supposed to be nice and warm. Go outside, breathe in some fresh air, maybe get some seeds, plant some flowers, plant some vegetables that you can tend to over the next couple of weeks. Have them grow. Some activity that you can really occupy yourself with, something that you can observe, something that you can enjoy with your family. Get out there and do something great. Have an enjoyable weekend, and we'll see you back here on Monday.